Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Camille Brown, and I'm the Curatorial Assistant at the Phillips Collection. Today, I am in conversation with Reggie Black to discuss his interpretation of the Phillips Collection Centennial logo. Reggie Black is a multimedia artist and designer using text to navigate trauma, hope, and optimism. Intersecting hand-type artistry, graphic design, and abstract painting, his work has exhibited internationally in cities including Bangkok, Hong Kong, New York City, Tokyo, and Washington, D.C. A self-taught artist who began his practice on pen and paper, Black has since conceived of new processes using both analog and digital techniques to create a signature hand type. Black has presented talks with Apple, Advertising Week, Floyd, TED, and Zound, addressing the importance of art, design, technology, mental health, and vulnerability. Please feel free to add any and all questions into the chat function. Thank you for joining me, Reggie.
Oh man, this is a long time coming. Good to see you, Camille, and thanks for having me. Looking forward to the talk.
Okay, so let's get right into it. We're going to begin by talking about some of your recent work, and we're going to end with your version of the Phillips Collection logo created to celebrate our 100th year.
Let's do it.
So before we get into the slides, I was wondering, can you talk more generally about the process that led you to hand type design?
What led me? I think realizing that my childhood influenced my life more than I gave it credit for. I've loved pens and stationery my entire life. And with that, it wasn't a popular thing to like, at least for me as a young Black man here in DC in the early 90s, late 80s, basketball and rap was the thing. But I've always loved stationery and hand type. I used to go to Sears and Roebuck with my grandma. She worked there, and I would just play with the pens in the stationery shop. But then Monday through Friday happened, and so I had to go to school and play football and all those things. But I always loved stationery. Fast forward, I think 20 years, going to college, majoring in business, going to grad school actually to try to get my master's in international business. But then the entrepreneurial bug hit me, and I was like, well, one of the things have to go. And so grad school went, and I started designing, a host of things, products, parties, events. I've always spent my life designing. But I think in 2018, I was probably, almost coming up on 30. I realized that all the things that I was doing weren't working, but there was one consistent thing, and those were my hands. And my love for handwriting and typography. Ironically, though, I didn't know any Black designers that looked like me, growing up in Petworth, DC. At that time, I think the magnum opus around here was to kind of get a good government job. And so I didn't have any examples or role models. I had entrepreneurs, if you know anything about DC history, growing up here was Chocolate City. And so it was 90%, 90, 95, 96% Black, almost 100 to be quite honest. And it was a beautiful ecosystem that I had the privilege to watch Black entrepreneurs go to work every day and run, small shops, large shops, funeral homes, banks. And as on my way to on my way to school, I would always say, I want to run my own business one day. And so those were the seeds that kind of planted what I wanted to do. And then when hand type kind of re-entered my life at 30, we got to Bangkok. I don't know if those listening have had an opportunity to visit Asia at all, and just the immersive culture and stationery. But when we got to Bangkok and we traveled up and down that side of the world, I just really was immersed by stationery and hand type and all the different writing instruments that you could fall in love with. And so pairing that with my ability to kind of have this cool, regular handwriting, I was like, oh, well, how would my hand look if I start to execute it with different writing instruments? And so, you got Sumi ink, you got large scale nib brushes, you got all these different things that started to add to layers to my hand. And then I met a few instrumental people in my life who was abroad that were designers. And there they were like, listen, we'll show you one in particular. He doesn't like to be named. He's really weird. He's like my sensei, I call him. It's like, I'll teach you everything I know, but if you got to dedicate your life to your hand because you have it. And so that I just kind of went on this rigorous course to learn all the, Adobe suite, but that we're talking like literally maybe 30. So full on high powered 8 years of like full force hand typing, carving out this language that allowed me to talk about the things that matter most to me. And that's vulnerability and transparency, particularly as a Black man, but then really just, as men in general, because that's something that we tend to like struggle with. So for me, it's like, how do I make vulnerability cool? And through hand and asking thought-provoking questions is what I've tend to felt like my life's mission is.
That was said so beautifully. Let's go to the next slide.
All right.
Okay, so this is from 2021.
Yep.
And you collaborated with Ava DuVernay's Array Alliance Foundation, correct?
Yep. So the Leap Initiative, founded by Ava DuVernay. We were in the height of a few pandemics. There was the social unrest in the country that was taking us all by storm. If you had a heart and you were watching Black men that looked like myself be murdered, Black men and women, and our trans family, you were watching that just kind of take the country by storm. There was COVID, there were rallies, so we were in a few pandemics, and Ava's team reached out to work on this project.
And so I think one of the things that really interested me about this project was I felt like a lot of the artwork that came out of this time period, it was portraiture capturing like the physical images of the Black and brown people who have been killed by police violence.
Yep.
And so I'm thinking of the portrait of Breonna Taylor by Amy Sherald, or the portrait of George Floyd by Shirin Damra. I'm curious, when did you begin to use hand type as a method of social activation?
It's a good question. And I do have to give all the credit to my wife. We were here, at home, locked away like the rest of the world. And for a long time, my work kind of spoke to this very aspirational place. It was, there was hope, and, not necessarily you can do it, but you know what I mean? Like in that space of like, let's all remember that the world is beautiful. And it was my wife, and then, the beautiful quote by Nina Simone, art must reflect the times. And I'm sitting here and I'm at the studio. At that time, I'm just mentally, exhausted. I'm crying almost every day, just by the weight of the world. I'm just like, well, what can I do now? My wife was like, well, I think now, I didn't say, what can I do now out loud? My wife and I were having a conversation. Shantae's her name. And she said, I think now you're going to really have to figure out how you're going to implement hand type to really speak to something, dude, because, if not you, a Black man working in this medium, who's going to do it? And so I love the Amy Sherald piece and so many of the amazing art that was created out of that era. And then when she said that, I was like, man, like, I think we were all feeling that responsible bug. We watch companies scramble to try to get their DEI in order. You know what I mean? Like we watched everybody try to like hire a Black artist. We watched everybody, scramble and try to put out their like bad press that they were doing. And I think we were all feeling the weight of wanting to do something. And this project kind of came right on time, not right on time, but I was sitting at home. If you go on my Instagram and you scroll down, I don't know, maybe a couple columns or rows, whichever they call them, you'll see that I at the time I was at home doing mock-ups of billboards, and I would do like George on one, and then Brianna on one, and then Ahmad on one, and that was just me at home trying to figure out what was next for my work. And one day, Allison and I, my manager, who's been a long time friend of mine, we just got like a random message, like, Ava's people want to talk to you about doing this project. And at that moment, I knew that the calling from my wife was aligning to the Nina Simone quote, which was aligning to the timing that I really needed to stand up and say something. And so the result of it is what you see here on the billboard. It was a multi-layered project. So there was the billboard. There's some digital assets that live at the Ray's headquarters where Ava, they screen films. There's a collection of chairs that I produced for at the headquarters. So it almost came in like a few different series, but this was the largest like public facing part of the project.
And I'm curious, what led you to this specific question, but also why ask a question rather than making a statement?
I think when you ask questions, you get to really get people thinking instead of telling the world what you feel. I think that's probably where we can improve on, is asking more questions as a society instead of all of us, making the statements that we feel are right. And so when How Many Weren't Filmed came to mind during the brainstorming session between Allison and I and the lead team on that side, we were looking at, of course, we know that police brutality isn't new. I don't know how old I was during the Rodney King, but I vividly remember it, right? And so we know this isn't new. And as a result of that, what we also know is that a lot of the murders and just things that still happen, murders that still happen in this country, we still don't capture them all. And so asking that question, on the corner of Sunset and La Brea in LA, one of the most like highly trafficked intersections in the country, I thought was just a way, whether or not people, you can see this one image here that's being captured with somebody riding with their like drop top. It's just a moment for them to kind of like at least ask themselves, be socially responsible, even if it's for 30 seconds. And so I thought a question would be more appropriate for them to at least be able to like keep going home and thinking about it instead of a statement. And you can just, well, that's their opinion. Statements are like, well, that's what you think, whatever, but a question, it puts the mirror on you. Yeah.
Could we go to the next slide?
Oh.
So now we're looking at the Get Home Safe print that you created in conjunction with Soho House.
Yep.
I thought this work was interesting because it contains an element of abstraction that's not necessarily present in a lot of your other work, or at least a lot of the other work that we'll see here.
Yep.
What led you to this particular composition?
Believe it or not, the early stages of Reggie Black was an abstract painter. There was something about me that was like, well, I'll tell you, not something about me. There was this, the imposter committee was like in my head, like, oh, your words aren't art, and if you want to make it in the art world, Reggie, you're going to have to paint. You're going to have to make a canvas. You're going to have to be hung in galleries. And for the longest time, I didn't understand that language was art. And so early in those years, when I was trying to carve out a DNA and a signature style for myself, I was an abstract painter and I used color. Fast forward to this project, I wanted to bring a sense of that element back to my work to create like a visual, visceral response. And so what you have on that back layer is original abstract work that I create out in the studio. 2 different studios just for layout and flow. So one is like a digital space where I just sit, analog digital space table where I just sit and make letters pretty much all day. And then we have like the studio out back, which I turn my garage into like a beautiful space. I'm going to try to figure out how I can start like inviting people over for like salons or whatever. But so then outside is where I do like a lot of the abstract work. And creating this work, this was the first time that making work. And then Allison had a beautiful idea, as she always does. She was like, oh, how about we take like a portion of the abstract painting and then scale that for size. So this actual piece that you're seeing is a portrait of a fraction of the large painting that I produced. And Get Home Safe, during that time, this was right around the time that the first project happened. Get Home Safe, I've been saying it my entire life, but not realizing the significance of its meaning we were just saying it around the way as like an homage to homies, you know, man, get home safe, man.
Mm-hmm.
Holler at me tomorrow, you know, not realizing that one of us had the potential and did not, you know, for the most part, probably wasn't going to make it home safe. And so when we applied for the Soho House Art Prize, which was supposed to be a large scale exhibition that would be exhibited at Soho House during Basel, the year that it was canceled, I think 2021. And I think they just had so many amazing entries that from that they did a runner-up series and all of us released a print. And so this is the result of the print. So working with Jealous Studios out of London to produce this work, you'll see like that back layer is an abstract painting, but that really visceral black stroke is a varnish that they use during the screen making process. So it's almost like 7 layers of paint on this actual print. And then that final layer is a red screen print of my actual letters. Of course, that's made from my traditional hand type and style.
You know, it's interesting when you talk about what Get Home Safe meant to you, because I think when I first saw this, it was immediately kind of gendered for me. Like I thought about women getting home safe and the ways that when I go out with my friends, my friends who are women, I text them when I get home and they do the same for me. And we do this every single time to make sure. So I think there are a lot of different ways to kind of read into that statement. I think
I love that. Thank you for bringing that to the light. I mean, for us, you know, it was just like, I mean, I said to some of my women friends as well, my wife, you'll make sure you get it safe. But primarily, I just vividly remember always saying that to my homies, like, yo, get home safe. Yo, dog, call me when you get home. But it's amazing to hear you say it, you know, from the women's perspective too, which for me, you know, I think if I can always find a way to speak to multiple different people from different aspects, then I think the work is done.
Absolutely.
Thank you for
okay. Of course, you did it. And so now we're gonna talk about the logo.
Yeah.
So can we go to this next slide?
Yep.
Okay, can you explain what we're looking at here? And can you talk about specifically what type of brush this is?
Sure. This is the beginning of every project. Every project, every commission, every identity project, anything that revolves hand type, whether it's a client reaching out or work that I'm working on myself, it starts with the basics, you know, a brush, a pen, a writing instrument, and ink. And so the brush that you're looking at specifically is a Japanese sumi brush that I actually picked up in Berlin during a recent trip. I got an opportunity to kind of leave the country for a bit, like in the middle of COVID, which like COVID travel was probably some of the heaviest travel that I've done. So I was like, oh, I might not leave anymore for a long time. But my nephew was moving abroad to play basketball and I went along with him. And of course, you know, if I'm going on a trip, I got to find a stationery shop. And so this was in Berlin. I picked up this brush and I just knew when I saw it, I love like the raw elements of it. I don't know if I can get up now, but it's like right there.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, I'll grab it. I should have thought about that when I was like trying to prepare all my props. But yeah, so this is the I have no idea like who made it, but when I saw it in a stationery shop that my friend in Berlin took me to, I just literally like fell in love with it. I love how thick the nib is. And so when I'm looking at instruments in a stationery shop or art supply store, I never really know what I'm going to use them for. I just love what they are at the time. A lot of brushes actually I just kind of collect and I really don't open or use them. So this is a stationery brush. What you see, the image is like the beginning of a process with it's being dipped in Japanese sumi ink, which typically comes in a bottle like this maybe. I just bought so many of these from our time in Asia, so I just bring them back and, you know, these are the two. And of course, I might need to get a more economically friendly cup that's just like a plastic
No,
cup.
I think the plastic party cup is exactly the way it needs to be.
That's like
It's
a plastic
perfect.
cookout cup or whatever. So yeah, this is where it starts. And I'm like, all right, well, when Phillips Collection reached out to us to be a part of this project, and it's like, oh, Phillips, I immediately started thinking about how I could reimagine the logo. And as the months and days went along, these were the two things that sort of sparked my attention to really get the ball rolling.
Can you there we go.
Yep.
And so how many of these sheets are you creating for each project?
I don't know. I don't have an answer. I'm creating as many as I feel like I got something. So I don't have a timeline. I don't have a set number. There's just like my favorite album playing in the background. I've tried to work to podcasts before, that didn't work. So there's just like some really like probably most of the time like either some old like rock music going on, or I like the Smiths a lot. It's weird. It's either like rock or like super like ratchet trap music going on. So I don't know, but I have no timeline. I'm just typically kind of making marks and making letters and creating. And when I'm, of course, I'll write the actual word down or whatever I'm trying to accomplish. I'll write it on just like a regular sheet of paper. So as I'm making marks, I'm like, okay, you got to get a nice P. You got to get a strong S. You got to get a strong I. And so I'm just kind of bouncing around. Rewind a little bit. There was a moment in time in my process where I used to try to write everything in one setting, where I would have literally sat there and just wrote Phillips over and over and over again. And what I realized that, part of me was like, well, you're cheating if you just kind of do it in different letters. But I'm like, well, who am I cheating? Because I make all the letters myself.
Yeah.
So if anybody, I'm cheating myself, if anything. And so that's when I kind of broke the process down. And the P that you see on the right, that's by itself is the actual one. There's a few letters that made it to the actual work that we'll get to at the end. But the P specifically that you see on the right is one of the P's that made it. I think it's this P and then that top P and that I actually. I think, yeah, that I right there, that just looks kind of like a brush stroke right there. Guy in the logo. And I think that P at the top on the far left, but for sure that one on the right is one that's in the artwork. And so these are just shots that I, take in the studio to kind of capture. There's 1,000 of these on my phone. So there's just, and this is also the way that I digitized them for the next slide we'll show. But, once the work is created here in its analog space, it has to go over to the digital space. So I'm kind of like two people sitting at the seat. I break my studio sessions up where there's probably like 3 or 4 days when I'm just like hand type. And then the next day I have to clean up the mess and get the space in order. I work, I'm like in front of a 27-inch iMac. So I'm just, in front of a screen for, 5, 6, 7 hours trying to make this collection of letters what you'll see at the final result.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And so something that I was so curious about when I saw this was like third from the left, it's like you drew a map. Is that something that is part of your regular process?
No. No. Let me not even act like I'm mapping out artwork. I'm not. So what happened, the word logo felt like I needed to run to structure. And so I was like, oh, okay, let me draw the logo. Cause the other side of my brain also do like identity. I'm like a brand and marketing nerd. So like when logos stuck out to me, I was like, oh, I have to like make a logo. And so that sketch is me just kind of playing around with, I had an idea of how I wanted the logo to come out at the final result. And that's just like this kind of blueprint. But in recent years, I've started making studio notes. So this is kind of a collection of them of what you see. And as I'm like thinking about a project or a talk or whatever I'm approached with, there's like these kind of like, just handwritten notes that I just scribble. and write down. I actually, there's a few of them in there where I write like what music I'm listening to as well, which I think is kind of cool. I don't see it here. I was just trying to look. So yeah, when you think about the Phillips Collection turning 100, you know, it's like, for me, it's like celebratory. And you know, growing up here, you know, before I got on bus and, you know, traveled around the world, and, you know, my first trip to New York to kind of start going to galleries, you know, there was the Phillips Collection, the Hirshhorn, the Smithsonian, the things that I had access to as a kid here in DC. And so seeing things differently, and, you know, vulnerability, and to be able to do something so long, when you think about 100-year process or project of any kind, that takes a level of vulnerability and accessibility, because I think, you know, Phillips is a cornerstone to the art and the art community here in DC. So there has to be a level of accessibility. So you have transparency, you know, process. I'm just writing notes. And at that time, I didn't know what I was going to do with these notes, but I was just really trying to work through the creative process of how I would arrive at the final artwork.
I mean, they're almost like, they seem like word banks to me, like writing a new history forward on the left. I mean, that, I think that's so lovely.
Well,
So are you doing this in one sitting? Is that, or you're leaving and coming back, or what does that usually look like for you?
I'm leaving and coming back, but most of the time, what I learned, because I'm such a drifter, and I've learned that like limitation is the best like constraint. So sometimes I'll put time limits on things just to not dwell too long. And so sometimes I'm like timing myself to get all the ideas out within a matter of 10 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever. And so this was, to your point, I'm a steal your, this was like a word bank really quick, just to kind of knock out all that I was feeling about the project. And so this is actually, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, this is at the MLK where I was.
Oh, wow.
Side that, not the cool side that faces the glass by the new cafe. It's like the quiet side. But yeah, I just sat there and was like thinking about this project. So yeah.
So are these the actual physical sheets that were digitized?
Yep, these are the physical sheets that were digitized. Yep.
So can we see the next stage when you've scanned what you've written?
So once all that handwork happens, we go to Illustrator. And like I said, I think we had talked earlier, being self-taught and kind of late to the game. I love, clearly there's this beautiful infatuation with letters and just writing things down. But I knew that in order for these letters to live on things in the world, I had to learn the programs that could get them there. And so Illustrator is like my primary, InDesign as well, but Illustrator, Photoshop not so much, but Illustrator, because the beautiful thing about Illustrator, for the designers and non-designers, but you know, once something is vectored, you can put it on as small as a business card or as large as an airplane, and it never loses its resolution or form. And so once these letters are digitized from, you know, just my hand marks and strokes, they then can be scaled to go on as we saw, the billboard, or, you know, one of my dream projects is putting my work on an airplane. That's why I always say airplane. Yeah, this is a screenshot of me working through the Phillips. And so you can see me, like, I'm just dumping them in Illustrator. And when I say putting them in, that process is just taking a photo of them with my phone. Adobe Suite, the Creative Suite, they have a beautiful ecosystem. I use their in-house app called Capture, where it looks like a camera app, but it's where you can house all of your files for photos that you take based on what project. And so I just use Capture. It snaps it like a regular camera, and then you drop it and slide it in Illustrator, and then it's vectored. But what I love about Capture is that it doesn't clean anything up. You get what picture was. And so that's a result of what you see here in the Phillips. Like I said, that P from that scan earlier, that I, and all those like really weird extra lines. I'm not typically concerned or trying to like reach perfection. I was kind of later on the creative process just really fell in love with wabi sabi, which is a Japanese culture that embraces imperfection. And so those like extra lines that you see could oftentimes be like when maybe like one hair of the brush will have more ink on it than the other, and it just kind of runs through. And so what you see here is literally exactly what I made.
So if we go to the next one, so something that I feel like has kept coming up when you talk about your work in these different areas is like the word vulnerability and transparency. Can you talk about the linkage, if there's any, between those words and how it's kind of visualized in this process?
I mean, for me, that's a great question. But for me, I think it's just, leaving things as is. And so with vulnerability, it's like, all right, how can I show? I think we had talked about that before. I've always viewed, art being, a painter, like somebody, there's wrist painters and there's wrist painters and there arm painters. And so I was always like, growing up, going to the Smithsonian or any major museum in the world you go to, you see these beautiful oil painters who are like up on paintings so meticulously that, you can't even tell that it's being produced by hand. And for me, I kind of take the opposite approach. I like to leave things as they are, be vulnerable on the page to show people like, listen, I'm a self-taught artist. I got into it late and I'm trusting my hand enough. And I'm fortunate enough and blessed to be in a position to produce this work. And so like what I don't want to do is forge or kind of lie to the people that are giving me the permission to share my work with them. So me showing up to my work 100% as myself, that's me exchanging my vulnerability to the people that support my work. And in exchange, we can kind of create this like beautiful dialogue between things that they're going through. Although you're looking at a Phillips Collection logo, this might kind of spark somebody to like go after that next job that they want to do. Or, you know what I mean? Like take that person out on a date. I don't know, but I'm just really trying to like show up and be who I am with the page. And so vulnerability and transparency is what you see here. And these are just screenshots of me like working through things in Illustrator. That 100 is done with like my signature. Sorry, should have got that, but since I'm here, might as well. That 100 is done with my signature Posca marker. Fell in love with these in Japan. Can't stop buying them. Buy them all the time. I have so many of them that aren't open. I have some that I like cut some of the nibs off of. This is like, if there's anything that like I know best, it's this marker here, and that's the Posca. So that 100 that you see, we'll get to the end results, is done with this one. Those studio notes that we had just talked about on the previous slide, what you see at the bottom in the center, that's just me kind of manipulating them a little bit, just dropping them in Photoshop and inverting the color palette. So, what you'll see is, first it's the original color, and then it's inverted with the white on black, just to kind of create that like cool grid look. And then as I was making this work, I was thinking about writing a new form of history, and typically bringing some of that modality from the get home safe work and the layers. There was a show that I had in Japan, Seek Law Start, when I did a collection of work that had a bunch of layers in it that I was just really in love with. So I was trying to go back and capture some of that. And when I was dropping the layers onto the artwork for this, I kind of, I don't know, one day I was just, trying to sort things out. And I was like, oh, wow, what if I put the studio notes in this work? And so they're there. Most people you'll know now by the end of this presentation when you look at it. And I was like, oh, what if I just kind of drop them in, change the opacity level on them a bit so they kind of just hide in the background. But what you see, back to your point, the vulnerability of what I've created is actually on the work.
Can we see the final result?
This
Oh
is
wait, we can stop here.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, my fault. So yeah, this is like, I guess, 80%. So once all the letters are,
Okay.
I think the most time is spent trying to format letters. And I think a signature DNA of mine is I've just got really comfortable and confident with tucking letters. So you see how that P kind of sits at the very edge of that like square, and then that H. I just, like I said, I'm not searching for perfection. I'm just trying to execute my ideas and get them out into the world. And so what you see, this is a screenshot of me working in Illustrator and the artboard. Once everything is there, once all the textures are there, you see the studio notes sitting in the back. They're kind of hanging off the artboard, but they'll get there. That black sheet of paper is actually a sheet of the paper from the studio notes that I balled up and then put back on there to kind of create that like rough texture. And those splatters are from spray can markers. The original 100 was going to be in me writing in spray paint, and I just didn't like it. So I was like, all right, let me go back to what I know. But what I did do, I bought those spray paint splatters into the work, and that's kind of how you have that top layer of the spray paint marker. So this is just me capturing another level of the process. Yep.
No, I think it's so interesting that you were able to capture so much texture, and it's like texture is not something that I think is often associated with like digital art,
Yep.
especially.
Yep.
And the other thing that what you're saying is making me think about is accessibility, like
Mm-hmm.
something that we're always talking about and thinking about, just like as an institution, is how to make museum spaces and art feel accessible.
Yep.
And I wonder if that is something that you have thought of about, especially being a self-taught artist. Is there like, are
All
there
the time.
moments?
All the time. All the time. So that there's the art world that we all love, and the few of the elitists can purchase artwork
Hmm.
that are the couple M's and up. You can buy that work. And then for there's a middle grade where you have some serious collecting going on in the 100,000 level, and one day I do hope to get there. I will get there, but then for let's say for the rest of the 80% of the world, like art has to be accessible. And so I'm like, all right, well, how do you make something that people can afford in their everyday life? One, so I'm looking at accessibility from a few places, price point.
Mm,
I'm also looking at accessibility from the type of art that it is, right? Like if I make one canvas work, only one collector can have that. If I make a work that is digitized, and then we can transform into a print, or we can make it some sort of textile, then you can scale that and sell those by the thousands or whatever. If I'm making just like a poster or a postcard, I remember like going to museums with my grandma, and you walk around the museum and you look. For me, I love museum guards in museums. They're the superheroes to me. Honestly, like they're the best for me. I think, and I actually think like the museum Baltimore. There's a museum in Baltimore that just did a show that was curated by the museum
yeah, they're
guards.
guards.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So I was like, man, that's for me. I'm looking at accessibility from that point, because most people that go to museums, art has always had this like gatekeeping structure, because you either have to go study art history to know about it. You go to museums and you feel intimidated because most of the things on the wall you can't buy. There's somebody in
Hmm.
all black standing there watching you, making sure you don't like step over the line, and your kid doesn't swing their backpack or something. But on the other side of that, there's this beautiful layer of accessibility that's like, man, like what will happen if everybody kind of knew the landscape of art? And so for me to share my process and do all the things that I'm trying to do with my work is just really me kind of being like, at the end of your trip in a museum, if you can't do anything else in the gallery in the museum, you can buy a postcard from the
Hmm.
shop. You know what I mean? Like you can get something
Yeah.
that reminds you of that experience. And so what I'm doing with my work, you know, it doesn't cost the price of a postcard. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm making it accessible in the point where people could feel like I was able to experience that with Reggie Black along the journey. So the screenshot is the final work of process, and I guess we can get to
the final one.
The final one. So this was the final submission that we sent over to Phillips to be a part of the logo Reimagined. And you know, for me, I'm like, all right, well, they said reimagine it, so I had to do it in my fashion. You know, like, you know, they sent, you know, Phillips Collection, they sent a bunch of, you know, files and logos, and you know, the easiest route would have been just be like, oh, you know, drop the logo on, work around it, blah blah blah, and kind of going about your business. But I just think for me, if I'm going to do something, you know, Seth Godin, who I know was like a famous author and I guess mentor from a distance of mine, he always says sign your work. You know, he doesn't mean sign your work physically, like literally, but like if you're going to do something, put your name on it. And so I think that anybody that knows my work or remotely close to my work, they can look at this and be like, oh, Reggie Black did that. And so I'm always really interested in making sure that I sign my work and I'm not hiding behind it, because I spent years doing that too, you know, just trying to make work that was like me, but not me. So if it was bad enough, nobody could like shame me for it. But now I'm just like, all right, like this is my style. I'm self-taught, I'm running with it. And so what you see here is the final result, you know, and it's just generally, typically once it leaves Illustrator, it's just saved as a high-res JPEG, so it doesn't lose any of the resolution. So those paint splatters that you see, if you look really close, like I can't touch on the screen, but if you look really close in between the H and the I, you see like those studio notes that's kind of faint in the back over there by the L. You see the balled up paper. You see the creases that are invertly in between the P and the L at the top. And with the one requirement from the Phillips was like, you know, make sure you use a color from my color palette. And these actually are my favorite colors, yellow, black, and white. And so using the Phillips yellow, I call it the Phillips yellow because they have this special thing. So using the Phillips logo, using the Phillips yellow there, I thought was appropriate. And so it's the process, you know, that's how we arrived at my contribution to, and there was 11 other amazing logos. So I'm just grateful to be a part of it and grateful that Phillips recognized artists from the area, although I've shown around the world, you know, DC's my home. And I think that having that responsibility to the artists here to bring them in such a large project to celebrate such a monumental moment, that was cool.
Okay, so I want to make sure we have time for some of the questions that I know are in the chat, but I have one last question for you, and I've asked this before, but because you created this work as part of the Phillips Collection's 100th anniversary celebration, how do you want your work to be remembered in 100 years?
Ooh, you didn't ask me that before. I would have prepared for that. Thought-provoking, man. I just, you know, when it's all said and done, I just want to keep asking really hard questions. And I hope that when I'm out of here and it's all said and done, my wife and whoever else is handling my estate and whatever happens, I just hope that somebody, you know, a young Black boy or, you know, boy of color or woman of color or anybody, somebody that wasn't like represented in the world can look and be like, all right, like here's a dude that took something that he had no cognizance or teaching or mentorship from. There are no designers or artists in my family at all, you know, and so I just hope that I could be used as an opportunity to kind of reimagine things. No pun intended to the Phillips thing, but I just hope that my work can be a beat, and you don't have to work in art and design. I just think that if you can look at me and say, here's a dude, you know, worked in education, kind of lost everything financially, you know, has the best wife and support system possible, and then reimagined his life to say, all right, I'm going to run with my hand. I just hope that that would be like, the art would reflect that. You know, you can walk through the the big retrospective show that'll happen in London at the Pompidou Center. It's all in my head. I'm just speaking it into an existence, but the large retrospective show that's going to happen in the Pompidou Center, you'll be able to see everything that I've done and like what the journey I've been on, all the risks that I've kind of taken. But really, it's just to speak to the individuals of the world that haven't had an opportunity to do the things that are in their head and to be an example that is possible.
I think you are. Thank you, Reggie. That was
Thank you so much.
amazing.
I appreciate you.
So I'm gonna, of course, I'm gonna ask you some of the questions that we have in the chat.
Sure.
The first one, I'm gonna give you a super easy one. How do you spell the name of the marker?
Which one? This one? Oh, Posca.
Yes.
Posca. I have some here that are like, so this one, oh, as you can see, I've had it so long, like all the labeling is ripped off. Fun fact, I don't use them all. I have like 1,000 of these and none of them are completely empty. And then if you start buying them around the world, you'll get like different labeling in different languages, but this is the Posca PC17K. And it comes with this nib. And yeah. So many people make this brand. Molotov has a marker like this. Krink, a brand out of New York that I love. They have a mark. All of them kind of roll with this, I guess this square nib. It's like a 0.5 millimeter. It's really hard to work with, but a lot of people make it because I think people love the boldness of it. But I've just been able to manipulate it to my hand and make it work. So Posca PC17.
Thank you. Okay, and I think we have a question about process. Can you explain the relationship between Capture and Illustrator?
So I think it's Capture is a new product in the Creative Suite. It's a mobile app, so whoever's asking, you would definitely have to get it either on your iPad or your phone through your Creative Cloud account, right? And when you download it, it has I would show you mine, but I don't want to open it up, and it has letters from other projects that I'm not supposed to be showing. But the app is just called Adobe Capture, and when you open it up, it just basically takes you back to the camera. And so when you capture what you're taking a photo of, it houses it in the Creative Cloud, so you no longer have to like keep all these paper. I used to throw all of my sketches away, but I started keeping it, and it's just a cleaner way that allows you to, digitize your whatever you're working on and keep it kind of organized. The logo is like, so if Illustrator is AI, the Capture one is a capital C and a lowercase a. It's a very new product. I learned about it at a tech conference I was at a couple of years ago. And it used to be Fresco. For whoever's asking, I'm sure they might be familiar with the old Adobe product called Fresco. The emblem was FR. And then I think the back-end designers just reworked it and call it Capture now.
Thank you. Okay, and our next question is, your letter forms feel very figurative. They each have different personalities conveying different moods. Do you go into projects with a sense of how you want people to feel when they see your work?
That's a really good question. I try to be neutral. When I'm working, I try not to inform how people feel. I like to leave that on them. But whoever asked that question, I think that they're spot on. And thank you for that, because I think the letters reflect how I'm feeling when I'm creating them. So, of course, every day isn't rainbows and sunshine. So when I'm like, being a Pisces and I got to still sit at the table, some letters might be, they might have some sad vibes or some Drake vibes. I don't know. But yeah, that's a really good question. I try not to inform. I try not to what I'm trying to do with my work is just offer it and let people decide what they want to do with it. So I don't necessarily think about, oh, I want people to feel. I'm more interested in what I'm really trying to say. Like, can I really execute what I'm trying to say? And then people can feel how they feel about it from there. But I can see, with a project, typically there's just a massive amount of time, whether it's short or long, that happens. So each different studio session that I'm sitting down at the table and like, all right, like, of course there's real life happening. So I got to bring all that to the table with me. And so if the hands don't move as fast that day, or if, it's raining outside or life is happening or whatever, it definitely reflects what's going on the page.
And so, thank you. That was answered beautifully. Can you speak a little bit about the difference between hand type versus typography?
Yeah, I think so. Hand type. I mean, I don't think I made it, but I'm trying to like coin it as my thing. Typography is the stutter. Excuse me, not the stutter. It's the study of letters and type font design. So if you probably ever interact with any major like design house or design studio or anybody in that space that's working with like actually building fonts, those are the typographers. And I do love that space. I'm learning it at the moment. I kind of set like an hour aside each day to really learn some of the programs that people are building fonts, because what I ultimately want to do is like start building fonts, not like my signature stuff, but some fonts that I've worked on that I could figure out how to sell and like get out into the world. So there's the typographer side that's just coming from a very graphic standpoint, graphic design standpoint. The world that I occupy kind of like falls in the sweet spot between calligraphy, graffiti, and typography, which is what I call hand type. And so that's just me. You taking your normal writing instrument, whether it's an ink pen or whatever, and you're writing a letter to your mom or your somebody, but then you take that and you use a different instrument and you write with it to see what you can get from it. And so hand type is all about bringing the human hand to work. You can't manipulate it in Illustrator. Of course it goes here, but I'm never like moving the shape of a letter once it's in Illustrator. And so hand type is really essentially what it's saying, like the human hand making the letters. And Japanese calligraphy is I think like the closest thing to what I would feel like is hand type, because if you watch a master calligrapher and they're stroking, or even someone that like writes with fountain pens, they really honor the human stroke of hand type. And so they're working with just their human hand. I hope I answered the question correctly.
Yes, I think you did.
It's just working on pen and paper, like hand type is just, all right, like I'm just gonna make some things and then I'm not gonna judge it. And then I think font design, because font design, as I'm learning in chapter 1 of one of my courses that I'm taking, like you can get in and like mess with the finest, millimeters of points. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not that. I'm with that. I live in the wabi sabi space. I'm not doing that. But that's typography and that's hand type.
So I think that leads nicely into our next question, which is you begin all of your works by hand. How did you develop your penmanship?
Great question. And I'm going to give him his credit, but it's my dad. My dad had amazing penmanship. I think my mom's penmanship was pretty cool too, but I know my dad had cool penmanship. But just growing up, I call it the DCPS green paper. that paper that was, it had the 3 lines and then the dotted line in the middle. I just, what I'm talking about, like, but ours was always like this weird green, and then it like turned brown because they kept it in like the storage rooms too long. So I just remember being a student, just loving to write stuff, and I always had journals. I think that wasn't really a like gender, appropriate thing at the time. So just growing up and working out a lot of stuff in my head, I didn't know about therapy or any of that stuff. So I wasn't like, I'm not gonna lie, like I was in therapy every Friday. I'm in therapy now, but growing up, like journals were my thing. And so I would just literally grab like composition notebooks or cool journals. And I just always loved writing. But I know for sure my dad has a really cool handwriting, only from jail letters. So yeah. So
Wow.
I my mom had some actually. So I'm working on getting those from her just for proof. But my dad had some cool handwriting. He's no longer with us, but my dad had some cool handwriting. And I think my love for writing just came from always wanting to express myself.
Mm-hmm. So, and I think we have time for one last question.
Cool.
What other artists do you draw inspiration from, if any?
Ooh, everybody. Artists. I mean, the late great Virgil Abloh might be like, I mean, he's not like an art, what the art world would call an artist, but I think he hacked the entire system. And I think that that's what I'm on a trajectory to do. I love the art historians and the history people. But I think that that's what kept art away. When you think about the origin of exhibitions, they were really salons for rich people. I know you know this from studying art, but about what art essentially was. It was like rich people gathering their friends over their house to look at their collections. And from that moment on, they just built bigger spaces for people to look at their collections. And so when we talk about artists who hack that, Virgil Abloh, Ai Weiwei, who's a Chinese artist who really bucks the system and creates things from a thought-provoking sense. Nina Simone, if we're talking about just artists in general, not visual. There's somebody on the tip of my tongue. Jenny Holzer, who works in typography. She's a multimedia artist who works in type and, does a lot of sound installations and neon installations. Barbara Kruger, who most people might know famously as the designer of the Supreme logo that they just paid her for after 30 years. But that's her hand type. That's her font that she created. Carrie James Marshall, Faith Ringel. I love that Faith Ringel is 91 years old and still making, some of the most beautiful work that we've seen. Carrie James Marshall, Faith Ringel. Yeah, there's a number of people, man. But really, I'm like really inspired by life and conversations and people doing it every day. Single moms are really my favorite people on the planet. I was raised by one. My wife was one for a very long time. And so, yeah, I just look at life and conversations. The coffee shop is an artist to me. They like everyone's in a coffee shop talking
the library.
About the library, the library. MLK specifically. So if anybody ever just rolls up on me, I'm typically in MLK. I grew up going to the Petworth Library. Nas, if we're talking about music, Jay-Z, if we're talking about, his use of language and double entendres and triple entendres. In the modern day, I love Kendrick. Ceramicists, I love sculpts. It comes from all different places, man. Singers, songwriters. I got put onto Ikebana when I was in Japan, and it's like the actual it's like the process of like making floral arrangements in a design. I think it's a really beautiful art form. Yeah, it comes from everywhere. I think my inspiration, travel. Anthony Bourdain is my guy. Rest his soul as well. So yeah, it comes from everywhere. I'm like a hodgepodge of those entrepreneurs that I walked to school to see opening and closing their doors in the 80s, Mr. Claude Williams, and so many of the people in my neighborhood that had Marshall's Funeral Home, who's still there, I'm just looking at the world and trying to assess it from every vantage point and then bring it all to my work. So I'm Pharrell Williams, forgot him. He's like probably my all-time favorite artist. James Brown's my all-time favorite artist, and then Pharrell. So yeah, hope I didn't go off on a tangent, but those are some of the people.
No, not at all. All of the artists, all of the genres, it all works. It's all feeding the same thing. But Reggie, no, you finish.
No, I said it's all feeding the same thing. You're exactly right. I love that.
Reggie, thank you so much for talking with me tonight. Thank you everyone for joining us. This has been really, really wonderful. Thank you for creating this wonderful logo.
Thank you all for having me.
We appreciate it.
I appreciate you all and the work that you're doing and the work that the Phillips Collection and everybody that attended. Thank you for letting me share my process, and look forward to staying connected. I'm on Instagram. I am Reggie Black, and my website is imreggieblack.com. I do have a few talks coming up this year. So Instagram is the most living organism of my life and work. So if you want to stay connected, that's where I am.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.